What the mad President Trump is threatening to put a 200% tariff on wine, cognac, and other European alcohol imports, including 200% tariffs. Could those beloved bottles of wine and champagne from the EU become pawns in the biggest trade war happening right now between the US and the EU? Here is what Nijov posted. Quote, the European Union has just put a nasty 50% tariff on whiskey. If that tariff is not removed immediately, the US will shortly place a 200% tariff on all wine, champagne, and alcoholic products. President Donald Trump has issued a bold threat. If the EU does not change its tariff policies on U.S. steel and aluminum, the U.S. will impose tariffs as high as 200% on wine, champagne, and other alcoholic beverages from EU countries. This is not a hasty decision, but a strategy aimed at pressuring the EU to change the unfair tax policies the U.S. claims they have in place. In reality, this is a hard blow to the EU's wine industry. In 2023, the EU exported about $13.1 billion USD worth of alcoholic beverages to the US, with French wine being the flagship product in that trade. A 200% tariff could cause the price of French and Italian wines to soar, leading to a decline in market share for EU wines in the US. This could severely impact major wine producers in Europe, as American consumers will face double the price for their favorite wines. The wine industry is unlikely to sit idly by. This tariff increase will certainly hit the wine industries in countries like France, Italy, and Spain hard. But this is not just a loss for Europe. If tariffs on EU wine rise, U.S. consumers may turn to other options, including domestic wines, shrinking the market share of EU wine producers in the U.S. One day to the other will help to stop to send our wines to the United States. There's no way we can sell wines in the United States. We can reach this market. We are suffering now to 100% tariff. After Trump's threat to impose 200% tariffs, the European Union responded firmly. Senior officials from the EU declared that Europe would not give up its wine industry and would protect these products against any threats from the U.S. The EU asserted that it would not concede in this confrontation and was ready to defend its national interests. The European Union strongly criticized President Trump's trade policies, arguing that the 200% tariff on wine and champagne would not only hurt the industry but also damage the trade relationship between the US and the EU. French wine producers, especially premium brands like champagne, will face great difficulties as high tariffs push up the cost of their products. France has spoken out to protect the interests of its wine industry and is ready to face any retaliatory measures from the U.S. However, this confrontation creates opportunities for U.S. wine producers. If the EU does indeed impose 200% tariffs on imported wine, U.S. winemakers could expand into the EU market, especially if the U.S. reduces tariffs on domestic wine. This could be a huge boost for the U.S. wine industry, allowing them to build and expand their market in countries that are already familiar with European wine brands. If the EU continues to maintain its tariff rates and refuses to yield, the wine industry in these countries will certainly face a significant decline in revenue in the U.S. At the same time, U.S. wine producers will have the opportunity to expand their market share in EU countries if they reduce tariffs on domestic wine products, especially California or Texas wine brands. The trade war between the U.S. and the EU is entering a phase of unprecedented tension. How will the EU respond, and can the U.S. seize this opportunity to expand its wine market in Europe? Don't look away, because the next developments in this tariff war will surprise you. U.S.-Canada trade war erupts. $30 billion in retaliatory tariffs immediately imposed. $125 billion more ready to hit the U.S. economy. Stocks plunging. U.S. businesses in panic. The U.S.-Canada trade war has exploded. Trudeau declares, Trump is trying to collapse Canada's economy to make us the 51st state of America. Is this just a trade dispute, or is there a deeper strategy at play? Trudeau strikes back. Don't let Trump's government fool you. In a powerful speech directed at the American people, Trudeau not only condemned Trump's administration but also warned, your government is driving up prices and putting millions of American jobs at risk. We don't want this, but we have no choice but to defend ourselves. And this wasn't just tough talk. Just hours later, Canada hit back with a $30 billion tariff package targeting key American industries. But that's not all. If Trump refuses to back down, Canada is prepared to unleash an additional $125 billion in tariffs within 3 weeks. What forced Canada into this retaliatory stance against its powerful neighbor? Trump fires back. Think twice. Canada will pay a heavy price. Donald Trump wasted no time in responding. On social media, he wrote, "Tell Governor Trudeau that if they retaliate, the U.S. will immediately raise tariffs, maybe even double them." Calling Trudeau Governor of Canada, was this a slip of the tongue, or was Trump hinting at something much bigger? But he didn't stop there. Trump announced plans to expand tariffs on key industries, including aluminum, steel, automobiles, and agriculture. The White House justified these actions by claiming that Canada has failed to control its borders, allowing dangerous substances to flood into the U.S. But is this really about border security? Or is this just a pretext for an economic power play? U.S. businesses and citizens in panic, while politicians wage war. The first to suffer are American workers and consumers. Within just 24 hours of Trump's announcement, the U.S. stock market plunged, gas and grocery prices skyrocketed. Businesses faced uncertainty with factories at risk of shutting down. A major U.S. retail CEO sounded the alarm. Prices will surge in the coming days. Millions of American households will bear the cost. And it's not just corporations. Several key states are now fighting back against Trump's trade war. Kentucky is furious as Canada slaps high tariffs on bourbon exports. Michigan is worried that thousands of auto jobs will vanish if Canada cuts off its supply chain. So why is Trump pushing forward despite the backlash? Will this war escalate even further? With the U.S. election approaching, could Trump be manufacturing conflict to rally voters? But with Canada striking back and American markets in turmoil, is this truly the right move? 3 key questions now loom. 1. Will Canada escalate its retaliation? If Trump refuses to lift tariffs, Canada may impose even stricter trade restrictions, potentially cutting off U.S. access to vital resources. 2. Can Trump hold his ground as American businesses protest? If the situation worsens, pressure from major corporations like Ford, GM, and the agricultural sector may force him to reconsider. 3. Who will pay the highest price? Both American and Canadian citizens are already feeling the impact. Food, fuel, and essential goods are becoming more expensive. If this war drags on, both economies could suffer severe damage, and the U.S. may risk losing a key ally. Who will win this strategic showdown? Trump is betting on shock tactics and immediate economic pressure. Trudeau is relying on patience and a calculated counterattack. So which side has the upper hand? If the U.S. economy takes a hit quickly, Trump may face pressure to de-escalate. If Canada can't endure for long, Trudeau might be forced to negotiate on U.S. terms. Which scenario will unfold? The trade war between Canada and the United States has just escalated to a dangerous new level. Canada has officially announced a 25% retaliatory tariff on nearly $30 billion worth of U.S. imports, hitting industries across the board: steel, aluminum, computers, sports equipment, and cast iron products. But this is just the beginning. In a bold move, Canada's finance minister made it clear, "We will not stand by while the U.S. imposes unfair policies on our economy. Canada will fight back, dollar for dollar." The latest tariff package includes steel and aluminum, $15.6 billion, computers, sports equipment, cast iron products, $14.2 billion, total impacted U.S. imports, $29.8 billion at a 25% tariff. This is not the first time Canada has retaliated. On March 4th, in response to U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, Canada struck back with $30 billion in countermeasures. Now tensions are exploding. The U.S. and Canada have been top trading partners, with a two-way trade volume exceeding $725 billion per year. But today, that alliance is collapsing. Former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, James Blanchard, warned, U.S.-Canada relations are at their worst point in modern history. We were once strategic allies, but now everything has changed. The White House is making things worse. Officials have referred to Canada as America's 51st state. The U.S. has accused Canada of decades of unfair trade practices. A top U.S. official even claimed this isn't about trade, but a war on drugs, saying that Tons of illegal drugs are pouring into the US from Canada. But wait, the facts say otherwise. According to US Customs and Border Protection, CBP, less than 1% of seized illegal drugs actually originate from Canada. So, is the US manufacturing a trade crisis to push its own agenda? Steel and aluminum. The US imports $15 billion in steel and aluminum from Canada annually. These tariffs will drive up production costs, impacting industries like auto manufacturing, construction, and consumer goods. Automobile industry. 75% of auto parts produced in Canada are exported to the US. If supply chains break down, American car manufacturers will struggle. Agriculture and food exports. The US exports billions in fruits, vegetables, and agricultural products to Canada. But with a 25% tariff, American farmers will lose market share. James Blanchard issues a stark warning. This crisis is artificial. The US does not have a trade deficit with Canada. We actually have a trade surplus in manufacturing. Our deficit is in energy, a resource we desperately need. The truth. The US holds a $12.5 billion trade surplus with Canada in manufacturing. But Washington's reckless trade war is now driving both economies into a downward spiral. New poll from CNN reveals 56% of Americans disapprove of how the administration is handling the economy. U.S. imports from Canada could see a 10 to 15% price increase within months. 150,000 U.S. jobs are at risk. If this trade war continues to escalate, inflation is about to get even worse. Prices on cars, electronics, and household goods will surge. American manufacturers will struggle to stay afloat. Working-class Americans will suffer the most. This is not just a political game. This will affect everyone. Washington is now considering additional tariffs on Canadian imports, a move that could be announced as early as April, but economists warn a more aggressive trade stance will backfire on the U.S. Canada will retaliate harder. The U.S. economy cannot afford a prolonged trade war. Will Washington continue down this path, or will they choose diplomacy? How far will Canada go in its next round of countermeasures? There will definitely be more surprises in the future. Don't take your eyes off the screen, because things are just getting started. I guess President Trump walks back tariff on most product from Mexico and Canada again. Canada, the retaliatory tariff will stay in play until that part is terminal. Canada has just announced a $1,160 billion plan to retaliate against Trump's tariffs, and this has even left the European Union surprised. Instead of accepting the losses from the new tariffs, the people and businesses of Canada have taken decisive action. From small shops to large supermarkets, they're finding ways to boycott American products and turn to local goods or seek European brands. Online stores specializing in Canadian products have also seen a strong wave of searches from consumers. Facing growing dependence on the U.S., Canada hasn't just reacted with retaliatory measures. The country has started to rebuild trade relations with other regions, especially Europe and Asia. The EU has become a key partner, as the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, opens up easier access for Canadian products. To the latest figures, trade between Canada and the EU has increased by 7% since the agreement took effect. The new wave of Canadian businesses has quickly taken advantage of the benefits from this agreement, reducing their dependence on the U.S. market. On electricity exports to Americans living in 3 U.S. states starting tomorrow, the move potentially raising costs and could threaten grid stability or 1.5 million customers. Premier Ford says, blame your president. You think Canada is doing something few expected, using energy as a strategic tool. Canada's oil, gas, and electricity have become weapons in this economic war. In 2023, Canada provided over 50% of the U.S.'s imported oil. However, Canada is no longer just selling energy to the U.S. Countries in Asia, like Japan and South Korea, have started importing oil and gas from Canada, reducing their dependence on energy from the Middle East. Canada's newly expanded Trans Mountain pipeline system could help the country export oil to Asian nations at a much higher value than the U.S. market. This could put the U.S. at risk of facing an unstable energy supply in the future. Has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. Am I government able to keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us? An important consequence that can't be ignored is the shift in Canada's internal politics. When the U.S. imposed tariffs, but not only threatened Canada's economy, but also sparked a strong wave of nationalism. Canadians, who have always valued peace and cooperation, are now rising to defend their national sovereignty. Even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has seen strong support from the Canadian people, with approval for his party unexpectedly surging. Canada's political landscape has changed significantly as everyone unites against the threat from their southern neighbor. There's no denying that the change in Canada's economic strategy will have far-reaching long-term impacts. Canada is truly finding its own path, no longer dependent on the U.S. market. Trade relations with partners like Japan, South Korea, and EU countries will continue to grow strong. Although this trade war may be a huge shock for Canada, it also opens up an opportunity for the country to assert its role on the global stage. North American relations may never be the same again, and this will impact not just Canada, but also the U.S.'s position in the global economy. Canada has not only withstood the attacks from the U.S., but has also found ways to restore its position internationally by diversifying trade partners, reducing dependence on the U.S., and using energy as a strategic tool. Canada has laid the foundation for a more independent future. Will the U.S. recognize this shift, and can the relationship between the two nations ever recover as it once was? Stay tuned for the next developments. The U.S.-Canada trade war has erupted. President Donald Trump imposes a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, and Canada retaliates with equal measures. The total trade impact reaches hundreds of billions of dollars. Is this the right move, or is it pushing both economies toward disaster? The U.S. and Canada are each other's largest trading partners, with total two-way trade exceeding $2 billion per day. Canada supplies the majority of aluminum and steel to the U.S., crucial for construction, auto manufacturing, and defense industries. When Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, U.S. production costs surged, significantly raising construction and manufacturing expenses. U.S. stock markets declined following the tariff announcement, with the S&P 500 dropping 1.7% in one day, reflecting investor concerns over economic damage. Inflation is expected to rise, driving up the costs of food, fuel, and consumer goods across the U.S. I want to speak, first, directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. Canadians are not against Americans, but against Trump's policies. Over 9 million American jobs depend on trade with Canada, spanning agriculture, manufacturing, and technology. If tensions escalate, over 1.2 million American auto and metal industry workers could lose their jobs. 70% of American imported oil comes from Canada, and any disruption could push gasoline prices to record highs. Your government has chosen to put American jobs at risk. At the thousands of workplaces that succeed because of materials from Canada, U.S. gas prices could rise by 50 cents to 80 cents per gallon, depending on the length of the trade war. Food prices could increase by 8 to 12%, particularly for dairy, meat, and produce. U.S. auto exports to Canada are worth $52 billion per year. A prolonged tariff war could raise domestic car prices by an additional 10 to 15%. Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Canada immediately imposed a 25% tariff on $155 billion worth of American goods, targeting agriculture, whiskey, automobiles, and steel. A massive Canadian boycott of U.S. products is underway, with over 60% of Canadians reducing purchases of American goods. The U.S. tourism industry could lose $5 to $8 billion as hundreds of thousands of Canadians cancel travel plans to the U.S. This is no longer just a trade dispute. It has become a battle for national economic sovereignty. I think in terms of what he wants, I heard he talked about banking again this morning in a tweet, which Doesn't make any sense. Gives American banks, of 16 American banks currently active in Canada, holding about $113 billion worth of assets in this country. So American banks are alive and well and prospering in Canada. Trump claimed that Canada's financial system was failing, but data proves otherwise. Canada's banking system is among the most stable in the world, with a non-performing loan ratio of only 1.1%, much lower than the 3.5% in the U.S. Major U.S. financial institutions continue to thrive in Canada, demonstrating confidence in the Canadian economy. Many U.S. economic experts warn that this trade war could reduce U.S. GDP by 0.7 to 1% within 12 months. The big question remains, is Trump's strategy really making America great again, or is it pushing the economy toward crisis?